Hello, and welcome to episode 51 of Things I've Learned from Barry Harris. And for this episode, I thought we would talk about something about chords and the importance of Barry's scale of chords, and how I think, in terms of his teaching, he would probably say that we have it backwards in terms about how we think about chords. So we like to name chords. We see a chord and we name it right away. But to Barry, the scale is more important than the chord. So in other words, the scale of chords that particular sequence of notes comes from is much more important than what we call that. Now, obviously, so that we're all talking about the same thing, we need to label chords, I get it, but that's the least important of the understanding. The first and most important understanding of a chord is what scale it comes from. Now, Barry always talks about his 4 scales of chords. The 4 scales of chords are the major 6 diminished scale, the minor 6 diminished scale, the dominant 7 diminished scale, and the dominant 7 flat 5 diminished scale. Those are his 4 scale chords. He sees every chord as coming from those scales, those 4 scales. So any chord you can think of, he sees as coming from those scale of chords. Just to give you, for instance, one of the first chords I learned when supposedly learning how to play jazz was a C major 7 chord, which is the chord found on the first degree of the major scale. If we go up the chords, C, E, G, B, there's your first C major 7. But when Barry sees that chord, he sees this as C6 with 1 borrowed note. And by a borrowed note, if we talked about his 6 diminished scale, so there's a C6 here, there's a diminished above it, and there's a diminished below it. So he's got this. So now, if he says this chord, he sees this B natural as coming from this D diminished. So he sees this as 1 borrowed note. So that's just to give you an example of where how he sees things. Now, the title of this video is going to be called, "What is the name of this chord?" And I'm going to show you a few different chords, and I'm just curious to see what kind of responses I get. But let's take, just for instance, this chord right here, which if we were going to play it, it's on the 4 middle strings. It's the 3rd fret on the A string, 5th fret on the D string, 5th fret on the G string, and 4th fret on the B string. Now, most of us know that chord would be C minor. And we would say, oh, that's easy. That's a C minor. That's no problem. I see that right away. Now, Barry has this way of looking at things where, and I've seen him do this a bunch of times, he'll have somebody walk over to the piano and lay 10 fingers on random notes, any random note, and he will tell you what 6 diminished or what dominant 7 or dominant 7 flat 5 diminished or minor 6 diminished those 10 notes are in, what scale those are in, and how you have to move certain notes so that you could see it because they're borrowed notes. I mean, it's incredible. I've never seen anything like it. And I remember seeing it the first time being completely dumbfounded, like, what is he even talking about? But now that I've started to get more into his chording idea and the things he thinks about, now I see, not only I'm starting to see it better, but I even think it's even more brilliant than the first 10 times I saw it. But anyway, so to take this chord, if I take this C minor chord, and you know what, I'm going to take this other chord, I'm going to do this. Now this chord is going to be, again on those same 4 strings, 4 middle strings, 6th fret on the A string, 9th fret on the D string, 8th fret on the G string, 10th fret on the B string. So here's what we got so far. This chord, this chord. Now I'm going to take the next set of strings, the next 4 set of strings, and I'm going to play this chord. And this chord is 5th fret, 6th fret, 5th fret, 6th fret. And it's on the D string, the G string, B string, E string. Strange sounding chord. And I'm going to take this last chord. What should I do? How about this chord? Now this chord is going to be same 4 strings that we just did. 10th fret on the D string, 9th fret on the G string, 8th fret on the B string, 11th fret on the E string. So here's our 4 chords. Now that is the outest, most dissonant sound, except with the exception of the first one, that you're going to hear. Now, I know for a fact Barry would see those chords and would tell you right away. Well, the first one he could say, one of the options is this C minor is actually G6. So here's a G6. Here's a diminished below it. Here's a diminished above it. Now, how is this G6? Well, very simply. We're going to take the D, and instead of the D, we're going to borrow the C from the diminished. We're going to keep the G, which is part of G6. The next note that's in G6 is a B natural, but we're going to make it C, which is going to be borrowed from the diminished also. And then the next note of the G6 is supposed to be an E natural, but instead we're going to do E flat from the diminished. So we got 3 diminished notes and 1 6th note. So we got 3 borrowed notes. And there's our G6. Now, if we were saying, if we were in, let's say, the key of D major, and we said, it's really beautiful, 1 6 2 5, and I just played it in place of E minor 7, which is G6. And the idea is now I created a little movement within the chord change. Within playing that, I just didn't play just a straight E minor 7 or just a straight G6. I made a little movement. I created a little dissonance and then resolved it. Now the second chord. Believe it or not, the second chord also comes from G6. Here would be a G6, which looks like E minor 7 for most of us. But the G6 would be, here's a borrowed note, a borrowed note, a borrowed note. So these 3 notes are borrowed, and this note stays the same for G6. So we got a borrowed note above, these 2 notes above, and this one below. So now we got this chord. So now I'll try the same. Actually, let's play G6 in the key of G. So we'll do 1 6 2 5 in G. So let's say, let's see. Really beautiful. Beautiful. There's the use. Now we've created something. Or I can make it like the 2 of D major. So here's that D major again. Do you see how beautiful this is? So what is the name of this chord? I have no idea. I have no idea what you'd even call this. Maybe an E flat major with a sharp 5 and a raised 5. I have no idea. You'd sound stupid trying to explain that. Okay, let's try the next one. So what the heck chord is this? Now you could say, well, it's a G with a sharp 5. There's the 6. And then what is this? let's see, a fourth, so an 11. I mean, it just sounds dumb after a while, putting all these numbers to it. What Barry would say is this is G6 with 2 borrowed notes. Here's a G6, here's a diminished above it. And there's the 2 notes above it. So if you borrow notes and then resolve them, you create this beautiful tension. So now let's do it in D again. Let's say. Beautiful, 1, 6, 2, 5 in D. Absolutely gorgeous. I mean, how beautiful that is. That's another chord. Okay, the next chord obviously is going to be, again, a G6, but with 2 borrowed notes. And it happens to be the 2 notes of the diminished again. So now we got this. So let's say the bridge of Body and Soul, what we'll say. Let's make it into like we're in the key of G major, so we'll say. There's so many things to do with these chords, but again, what would you call this chord? I have no idea. And it's not important. What's important is that you see it in the scale of chords. That is the most important thing. What scale of chords does it come from? So that shows you that naming the chords is second. The most important thing is what scale of chords it comes from. And Barry hammers that home all the time and discusses it all the time. And lately I've seen a bunch of videos where they talk about what kind of chord is this, what kind of chord is this. That's great if we're thinking diatonically. But if you know Barry's scale of chords, his 4 scale of chords, there's an endless amount of chords you can know, and you don't have to name. You just have to know where the diminish is around them and how to resolve it. It's totally unnecessary to know the name of it. Completely unnecessary to know the name of it. So just like his single note system of explaining so that you can take his theory and make it your own and sound like yourself, his scale of chords in terms of chording accomplishes the same thing. It allows you to improvise within a set of chord changes where I can sound different from another person who can sound different from another person, but yet we're all using the same scale of chords and we'll all sound different. We'll all put them in totally different spots. And again, that I know I say this all the time, but that's what makes his system the best as far as I'm concerned. I've never seen anybody else have theory that can lead you to all these different possibilities, endless amount of possibilities. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed episode 51 of Things I've Learned from Barry Harris, called What is the Name of This Chord? Till next time, thanks.